Hello, everyone. This is Greg Jovinson, editor-in-chief at Rider Magazine, and your host for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. Our guest today is Gordon McCall. Gordon is the CEO of McCall Events and director of motorsports at Quail Lodge and Golf Club in Carmel Valley, California. The 12th annual Quail Motorcycle Gathering presented by GEICO takes place this Saturday, May 14th. The sold-out Quail Ride, a 100-mile ride for 100 motorcycles that includes parade laps at Laguna Seca Raceway and a gala dinner, is on Friday, May 13th. The Quail Motorcycle Gathering features more than 350 motorcycles displayed on the golf course at the Quail Lodge. There are 11 traditional classes, including American, British, Japanese, competition, antique, and others. Featured classes at the 2022 Quail include Harley-Davidson XR750, BMW Slash 5, two-stroke Braaaps, and mini bikes Big Fun. This year's Legend of the Sport guest will be Roland Sands. We talk with Gordon about the history of the Quail, what makes the Monterey Peninsula such a special place for motorcycle and car events, and what attendees can expect. The Quail was on hiatus for 2 years due to the pandemic, so Gordon and the Quail team are excited to welcome motorcycle enthusiasts back this year. Tickets for the Quail Motorcycle Gathering are available online or at the gate. Stay tuned for another great episode. Presented by GEICO. There was a 2-year hiatus, so this will be the first time the Quail will be held since 2019. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So it's actually 3 years since we've done this show.
3 years. And this will be the 12th iteration of the Quail Motorcycle Gathering? Is that correct?
Well, yes, it is correct. And it's for those somatics, it's those off years kind of threw us off. So we're referring to it as the 12th annual, correct?
Awesome. Yep. Now, for folks that are not familiar with the Quail, could you just give us a little bit of a background about what the event entails?
Sure. Motorcycle shows have kind of come and gone over the years. And one of the things that we wanted to do was highlight the hospitality opportunities that Quail Lodge and Golf Club offer. It is a resort. It's an amazing property. We do a very popular car show each August during Monterey's Car Week, for which we've included motorcycles since day one. That show will be 19 years old this year. So about 12 years ago, actually 14 technically with the pandemic, we decided to do a standalone event and just feature motorcycles. And I have to say, with the efforts of the Peninsula Signature Events Department within the Quail Lodge and Golf Club under the direction of Courtney Ferranti, they do an amazing job. I mean, that office does all the heavy lifting to produce this event. And it's something that, in fact, stands on its own. It's motorcycles only. And, Greg, quite frankly, with motorcycle shows, sometimes people aren't used to, and I'm a biker. I'm kind of associated in the vintage car world, but I've been into bikes my whole life. And prior to an interest in cars, I had an interest in motorcycles, like a lot of us. At 14, I had my first motorcycle, which I still have today, which is kind of embarrassing. But at any rate, we wanted to really showcase kind of a proper show that represented everything. And that sounds kind of fluffy. Like so many shows get pigeonholed into, it's a British show, it's a custom show, it's a this, that, or the other show. Right. Well, the Quail is really an all-inclusive show that literally has everything. We've got, Grand Prix racers, we've got custom builders, we've got choppers and scooters. I mean, it's everything. And our philosophy has always been, and this comes from being a true bike guy, is if it's got two wheels, that's the common thread here, and right. It kind of sounds like, well, that's not going to work, is it? Aren't those like apples and oranges? And as it turns out, no, it's not. We all share this common interest in motorcycles. And I can't believe some of the relationships that have come out of this show. It's really remarkable, quite frankly.
Well, that may be, if people aren't aware that, sometimes people, as you said, think of motorcycle shows as, well, they're going to be vintage bikes, or they're going to be Harley-Davidsons, or they're going to be something. But, at these Quail events, you've got hundreds of motorcycles, and some of them are vintage. Some of them fit into specific categories. But you also have some new motorcycles. You have some manufacturers that will have displays there. Now, my understanding is that you have some traditional classes that are typically at every Quail event. So you've got, say, a European class or an Italian class, various classes in which people can display. And then those motorcycles are judged within each of those classes. And then there's a best in show. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's how it works. So we have 11 standard classes, which reoccur every year. And like you said, Greg, it covers all the bases, antique, American, British, European, et cetera, et cetera. In addition to that, we like to offer some featured categories. With this pause with the pandemic, it kind of messed up our anniversaries because a real significant one, at least in my book, was the 50th anniversary of the Harley-Davidson XR750.
Right.
Arguably the most successful competition motorcycle in the history of two wheels. It was celebrated 50 years 2 years ago. Well, we're rolling that over because it's a significant mark, and we've got some wonderful XRs coming to the show. We also have, it's funny. There's a word that I think you would agree. When you hear the word, you can smell what that word represents, and we're featuring a two-stroke category, and we're calling it Braap. When you say the word Braap, I think we all we go right there. We know that sound and we know that smell. So we've got a whole two-stroke category with everything under the sun in it that's got two-stroke driven motors. We've also got a mini bike class. I think we'd agree that we all got our start there.
Sure.
Whether it was thumbing through a Sears catalog or the friend down the street that had the Taco or the Bonanza or whatever, mini bikes were very influential in a lot of us motorcyclists' lives. And so we've got a whole category of them. And then also we thought it was appropriate. It was the 50th anniversary of the /5 BMW, one of the most customizable motorcycles out there. And we've got a slew of those coming as well. So in addition to our traditional classes, we have these special features. And every year we like to honor a significant person that's contributed to the motorcycle community. And in the past, we've covered all the bases with the Grand Prix stars. We've had Kenny Roberts and Eddie Lawson and Wayne Rainey, and you go down the line, Gene Romero, Mert Lawwell, pretty big names in the bike world. Well, we shifted gears a little bit a few years ago, and we honored Arlen Ness. And I'm really grateful that we did when we did. Obviously, Arlen is no longer with us, but we brought his son Corey and grandson Zach along. And what that did was it kind of opened up, the custom world. We can't ignore how popular the custom world is.
Absolutely.
And he's the grandfather, was the grandfather of the custom movement. Well, this year we're honoring Roland Sands. And Roland is, in our book, kind of the heir apparent, one of them at least, to what Arlen really started, the movement Arlen started. So we're honoring Roland.
Awesome. And Roland, he's got, you kind of get a twofer. He's a AMA 250 champion, so he's a former racer, but he has certainly made a huge name for himself in the custom bike world. I know he has collaborated with many of the leading manufacturers, whether it's BMW or Harley-Davidson or any of these others, as he's done custom projects and been commissioned. So he's a very, very suitable person to be honored this year. That's great.
Well, it's kind of fun, Greg, as we started off, I'm starting to call him Rolling Sands because we've rolled him over 3 times as well. And Roland, I was actually introduced to Roland by my good friend, Wayne Rainey, a former GP star, and who I was just with actually just a few minutes ago. Roland, he'd heard of the show, but he didn't really know much about it. And as he learned more, and as we sent our press release out, and he talked to people that had been to the show, he got more and more interested in it, which is really cool. So his dad, Perry, and Roland really started, Perry really started his business out of a build, that 46 Indian, I believe he calls it the peyote puffer.
Yes.
Remember that bike, Greg?
Yes.
Yeah. So that bike is coming to the show. So is Roland's dad. His sister, Summer, is coming as well. He's bringing the whole family. He's bringing a bunch of bikes. It's just going to be fun for us to kind of roll the carpet out for him. And most importantly, fun for our guests to be able to interact with Roland because he's a very approachable guy. And so we're going to have a little fireside chat with him on the stage at noon. And I brought my other custom builder friend, Brian Fuller, into the fold as well. So Brian's going to sit down with me and we'll have a little chat with Roland and figure out how do you go from 250 Grand Prix champ in 93 to one of the preeminent custom builders and, clothing manufacturers for quite frankly, big into that too. So
yeah, he is multi-talented and he's built quite an empire for himself. I know that you're involved with the Laguna Seca Raceway. Have you had a chance to see any of the King of the Baggers racing? I know he he
Yeah,
campaigns an Indian chief under the Roland Sands name. So
absolutely. Well, funny you mentioned the whole Moto America Bagger series, which is, who would have guessed that series would turn into what it has? But Moto America is actually the creation of Moto America. You could point the finger back to the Quail Motorcycle Gathering as to where Moto America was formed.
wow.
It all came through getting some mutual friends together. I mentioned Wayne Rainey earlier. Got Wayne together with Richard Varner. We sat down in my office a few weeks after that show. I've got a TZ750 in my office, and we kind of talked about how come there isn't a modern version of that bike today, talking about dominant road racers. And next thing, Richard Pollock gets involved with building a bike. It ended up on the cover of Cycle World. Wayne and Richard, along with a couple others, created Moto America, which has basically saved road racing in the U.S.
Absolutely.
And in Wayne's view, it wasn't enough to be a former three-time world champion. He wanted to be the guy that helped find the next American world champion. And lo and behold, a few weeks ago, Joe Roberts took a podium in Moto 3 over in Europe. So it's working.
I had the opportunity to interview Wayne on the podcast probably about a year ago, and I know he lives there in Monterey, as you do.
Yep.
And I was always admired him as a champion. Never had an opportunity to speak with him personally, but he's Wayne is obviously very down to earth, but also just very dedicated to the sport in which he has competed, and he was part of that generation, included Kevin Schwantz and himself, and Freddie Spencer and Eddie Lawson, of these American racers who really reached the pinnacle in world GP racing. And I know that he wants to sort of return the American road racing series, because the AMA Superbike series was always a major feeder class for
absolutely
for GP, to return it to its former glory. Yeah,
that's what he's working on. He's also doing something that I think is incredibly inspiring, and I'm involved in this with him, and it's an honor to do so. But he's heading to Goodwood in June, and he's going to ride his '92 World Championship YZR 500. He's going to ride it up the hill climb at Goodwood in front of 50,000 people. Yeah. So for anybody who has obstacles in their life,
right.
To watch a guy who lives his life in a wheelchair now and has for the last 30 years, get on a 500cc Grand Prix championship bike and go up the hill it's inspiring.
Wow.
That's what kind of guy Wayne is, though.
Absolutely. Yep. So speaking of Wayne, so the Quail Motorcycle Gathering, it's a one-day event. Like I said, it's going to be this Saturday. It's May 14th. And we'll have a link to where people can get tickets if folks are in the area. But the day before, I know it's actually already sold out, but you have something called the Quail Ride. Tell us a little bit about what that is.
Yeah. So the Quail Ride, it's funny. A static show was, in my book, just I don't want to call it not enough, but when it comes to motorcycles, we all want to ride them. That really is, it's fun to look at them, but it's more fun to ride them. So we thought we'd do this ride idea, and I ended up taking out 100 bikes on a 100-mile ride the Friday before our Saturday show, and we end up at Laguna Seca for a couple of laps, which is kind of fun. Parade laps, we like to call them. And then we have a big gala dinner that night, which is it's just a fun component. Now, as you'd mentioned, Greg, it does sell out early, so that component is not available at this time, but certainly next year it will be. And it's something I really encourage people to do, because it gives you a chance to kind of get behind the ropes.
Sure.
And you become a little bit more involved in the show. And I find that's the case with our entrance. We get about 350 motorcycles on display. And I talk to a lot of my friends that show motorcycles there, and they find that being a part of the show is, I don't want to say it's more fun than being a spectator there, but it just pulls you a little closer into the action, so it's fun.
Well, I mean, for anybody who, hasn't, I've been fortunate enough to go to a couple of motorcycle press launches and had an opportunity to ride on Laguna Seca. So to take a motorcycle on the Corkscrew, which is a, world famous corner, to be able to do that, but also to ride and see other motorcycles. And of course, in the Monterey area, for anybody who's not familiar with it, Monterey, Carmel Valley. That's, you're just north of Big Sur. It's some of the most scenic and beautiful riding in California. So
I ride a couple days a week. I'm kind of a fair weather rider. I won't go out if it's nasty, but fortunately our weather around here is pretty good. But I don't mind getting caught in it. I just don't like to start off.
Understood.
You mentioned the roads, and it's funny, Greg. We've got several groups. The largest being Brian Carroll's group, the Why We Ride to the Quail fundraiser that Brian does. And Brian is the gentleman that put together the Why We Ride documentary that was so popular a few years back. I was honored to be a part of that. But Brian puts together a group, and they ride up from Southern California. When they get to the Monterey Peninsula, they realize they have just hit the most amazing roads and so little traffic in May. You can really, as a motorcyclist, it's a really great time to enjoy your bike and camaraderie, fellow riders, et cetera. It's really, really all good.
Well, and then the Quail, the main event, I think that's one of those things that's sort of like whether it's the the superbike races, whenever they're at Laguna Seca, you have people that ride from, down from San Francisco, up from LA. It tends to be an annual pilgrimage for people. I think the Quail, the Motorcycle Gathering has become that for many people as well, where, hey, let's get a group of people together and ride up from different areas. Like one of our contributors, Clement Salvadori, known by his beret, I'm sure Clement.
I see him there every year.
Yeah. So, he rides up from Atascadero. Our former editor-in-chief, Mark Tuttle, who, by the way, he's going to be attending this Saturday, wanted to say hello.
Fantastic. Good guy.
He'll be riding up from Southern California. I unfortunately can't attend the Quail this year. I will be in Athens, Greece, about to kick off a 2-week motorcycle tour. So
what are you riding?
I'll be on a BMW GS. I'm doing a tour with Edelweiss Bike Travel, but it's nice. 2-week tour around Greece that we've been co-promoting for over a year. It got postponed because of COVID and so forth. So we're finally able to make it happen. So
that's a valid reason, Greg.
Exactly. That's one of the few excuses that's worthwhile. But like I said, people, want to gather at this event because it's open to the public. Anybody can buy a ticket. You can come see the motorcycles. What, is interesting is whenever you have a gathering of motorcycles, whether it's at a race or at a show, it's sometimes the parking lot or the roads leading into the show can be just as interesting for some people, because as they walk by and they see somebody's like, well, I want to ride this particular bike to this show, this event. And so there's a lot of tire kicking that goes on before they even come through the gate, I'm sure.
Well, it's so true. And something, again, I have to hand it to Quail Lodge and Golf Club and the Peninsula Signature Events Department. They're in the hospitality business. It's what they do. And kind of getting back to what I was saying originally, Greg, is the idea of motorcyclists being welcome guests. When you arrive at this show, typically, I can't tell you how many times I've been on my motorcycle. I ride a GS Adventure as my daily bike as well. And, there's so often you can just tell you're getting that look where, you can't park there. Right. The opposite at Quail Lodge. It's like, no, please park right in front. We want you right here. You're a welcomed, valued guest. And the show before the show is almost as good. It's amazing. We just line the bikes up on the street. It's an impressive gathering of bikes, but most importantly, it's this welcoming that takes place. It's pretty cool.
Well, so not only do people get to see their friends or their friends' bikes or strangers' bikes. Again, being, between Los Angeles and California, you've got, this is very much a motorcycle mad state. You've got year-round riding. So people will bring all kinds of motorcycles, but then when they get into the show, the motorcycles are parked right there on the golf course. You're outside, and it may start off as a foggy morning. I'm not sure about the May gray this weekend, but
we've got a great weather prediction coming in for Saturday. Yeah, it'll be a little breezy, but it's going to be clear and in the mid to high 60s. So we're looking really good. And it's funny, getting back to your point too. I think as we've had questions, we used to have an auction. Bonhams is a longtime supporter of our August event as well as our May motorcycle show. We used to have a Bonhams auction in conjunction with the show, but we just found that we were kind of competing against each other.
Okay.
You've got a certain amount of time during the day, and you've got people there that are looking to buy motorcycles at an auction, and then you've got people looking to have fun and show their bikes, and so it got kind of a little wonky. And so we decided, look, let's just have this be about the show. Well, the reality is, the majority of those motorcycles on our show field, even though there's no for sale signs, I think we all know in the bike world, everything's for sale. It's just amazing the connections that get made, people stumble into a bike that they used to own years ago, or that goes on all day long. And I just love it. It's such a neat component.
Well, you mentioned one of your featured classes this year is the mini bikes. Mini bikes, big fun, I think, is the name of the class. Is you're absolutely right. I mean, mini bikes are. I mean, I actually have a brand new Grom test bike in the garage, but the mini bikes that many people grew up on. I'm sure you keep up with this, but the values of old Honda Trails, 70s, 90s,
70s for car money now.
It's pretty remarkable, and they can be pretty rough shape around the edges, but they're commanding high prices. So that's a really great part of any motorcycle show, is the nostalgia that people feel for certain of these. Some of them are aspirational vehicles. I mean, you'll have Vincents and other machines that somebody's never owned, but they've always lusted after. I see you've got one behind you on the wall.
That's my Black Shadow. Yeah.
So, but a mini bike is something that most people have probably owned, or they had a neighbor that owned one. It's less about the aspiration than it is about the nostalgia and sort of reconnecting with the roots of when they first started to ride.
Nostalgia is certainly a big part, I think, of why all of us are so well connected in this motorcycle world. There's something about the memories that we all have. We all share very similar memories in terms of your first bike and how you went about pulling that off in the household. And it's a very common story. And it's funny, Greg, something I've learned over the years is I really feel this way. Again, I spent a lot of time in the vintage car world professionally and et cetera, but I find that the vintage motorcycle world, it reminds me of the vintage car world of about 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. We can thank things like auction companies and publications for really focusing on the value of vintage cars.
Sure.
That's really become a thing the past, 10, 15 years, whatever. And it seems like that's often a first question, especially if it's somebody that's not really in that world and they see a vintage Ferrari or whatever. The first thing they'll say is that the one that I just read about that sold for $20 million? The numbers start coming into play. Whereas in the vintage bike world, it's typically the last thing any of us talk about. It's not what the motorcycle's worth. It's got more to do with, was it your dad's? Is that the bike you learned how to ride on? Is that, there's more of a, I don't want to call it authentic, because it's not like it's not authentic in the car world. It's just, it's nostalgic, quite frankly.
What's interesting about that is, so Polaris Industries bought the rights to the Indian motorcycle company and relaunched it in 2013 for, I guess it was a 2014 model year. So we're about 9 years in under Polaris ownership. So what's interesting is they make great motorcycles, but when they first came out with them, they had much more of the traditional look with the balanced fenders. There would be some fringe perhaps on the seats and so forth. Now they've modernized the look of those bikes, but it's still the Indian logo, still the Indian headdress on the fender. And of the test bikes that I've been on, whenever I'm on an Indian test bike, I'll be at a gas station, I'll be at a diner, and invariably somebody comes up to me and starts talking to me about their father's Indian or their grandfather's Indian or something. They know nothing else. They may not even realize that it's a contemporary or modern motorcycle with ABS and traction control and ride modes and all these things, but it just looks very traditional with chrome. But it's the Indian name, just like it, for many people have the Harley-Davidson name, or maybe Triumph, or some of these brands that their father or neighbor or somebody may have owned. But Indian seems to have really reignited that for some people.
I totally agree. I think something else that it definitely applies in the motorcycle world, particularly the vintage motorcycle world, and that is you can't fake it. You just can't fake it, with vintage, and I do vintage race old cars, but you can get away with a lot in a vintage old vintage car. If it's a Can-Am car, you can park it in the corners, stab it down the straightaway. You can pull it off. You can kind of Walter Mitty your way into that scene, right? Try doing that on a 500cc Manx. Good luck. So therefore, that word authentic comes to mind, because you really have to be 100% engaged in what it is that you're doing. And I think for that reason, it just kind of makes the folks that are in it really in it. It's an all-in thing. It's not a casual. And at the same time, and this is without any disrespect, I mean, I'm guilty of it myself. I've got a Bultaco 250 Matrala here in my office, which there's a reason for that. I'm like a trained circus bear on that bike, and that bike is better. It's better in my office than it is me riding it. I'm 6'5", so I just thought that bike would not fit. But I love looking at it, and so there's that element of vintage motorcycles also, is the office art component.
Sure.
Some of these motorcycles are just flat out beautiful to look at. You don't have to ride them to appreciate them. You really don't.
Well, I was fortunate to go to the Art of the Motorcycle exhibit when it opened in 1998 at the Guggenheim, and I lived in Philadelphia at the time. I rode up on my motorcycle, and you were talking about the Quail Lodge welcoming motorcyclists. Of course, there on the street or the curb in front of the Guggenheim, they had motorcycle only parking, and so it would be lined up. And it was just a cool sort of experience. But then, inside, anybody who's attended any version of that show, that I know it went to Las Vegas and Bilbao and so forth, different Guggenheims, but just that was the whole premise of that show, is the art of the motorcycle. And it broke attendance records for an art museum, and that ruffled some feathers in the traditional art world. But it really is about the sculpture of tanks and bodywork and the shapes of exhaust pipes and fins on cylinder heads and so forth. It was just really a pretty special show that really brought that home. So.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I also think the idea of the design element of motorcycles, I've always loved the fact that you can't hide anything.
Right.
Unless you're a Pacific Coast Honda.
Exactly.
It's out there for the world to see.
Right.
And I just think that is there's that artistic side of it, even when you see, some of the petcocks from the 30s, it's like, whoa, they really put some time into that design. It's really neat. Yep.
Well, not sure if you had a chance to see it, but the SFO Museum, which is in several terminals, has various exhibits and they had one last year about early American motorcycles. That was a really stunning event. I didn't see it personally, but we had a feature about it, had some stunning photography and so forth. And just looking at some of the types of metal used and the shapes and some of the detail images of some of those motorcycles, and being able to go to a show like the Quail and just get up there close, and you're not going to be behind a velvet rope. You can get up and look very closely at these.
There's no ropes. There's no ropes there. And, chances are, especially with the custom bikes, just hang out long enough around the bike and you'll end up talking to the person that built it.
Sure.
It's really neat. And if it's got any kind of alloy gas tanks or, any kind of the Evan Wilcox type of custom, all you have to do is look at the hands of the person standing next to the bike, and you'll be able to figure out if that's the person that built it or not.
Exactly.
There's no disguising that.
So Gordon, you live and work in Monterey. I'm curious, I'm not originally from California. I've lived here for about 15 years, but with the Pebble Beach Concours base there, there's obviously Laguna Seca. There's the historic car races. How did this sort of become this nucleus for both vintage car and motorcycle gatherings and the car shows? And I know Monterey Car Week is a huge thing in August. So how did that come about?
Well, I think if you had to put a finger on it, Greg, a lot of it can be traced back to a guy named Trader Vic, who was a real outgoing San Francisco restaurateur, entertainer.
Okay.
He threw amazing parties. The road races in the Del Monte Forest in Pebble Beach is really what started it all in the early 1950s. Before there were car shows, before there was auction, before there was any of that, there was road racing in Pebble Beach, and that lasted up until 1956, when there was a fatality. A guy named Ernie McAfee hit a pine tree in his Ferrari and perished. And that's when they said, that's it with the road racing on the roads. And that's when they built Laguna Seca Raceway. So what happened, I think, is the Concours, the Pebble Beach Concours, for which it is the granddaddy of them all, worldwide. That broke out, a couple of years after the first road races, and then they kind of ran them in conjunction. And then you get Laguna Seca built, and so people started coming here for that. The history at Laguna Seca Raceway is bar none. It really is incredible. Every famous race car driver in the world, including motorcycles, has been on that track. And it's an area that's just very appealing for enjoying motor cars and motorbikes. The weather here is great. It's a wonderful destination. One of the things we like to do with our Quail Motorcycle Gathering is we leave Sunday open so that people that travel here from elsewhere even if it's just a car ride down from
Sure.
Santa Cruz or whatever. Gives them Sunday to enjoy the peninsula, go to the aquarium. I mean, it's a world-class aquarium here. There's wine tasting. I mean, there's, you name it, right? So I think it's a combination. It's like, why is there a Formula One race at Monaco? It's
Right.
it's a similar situation. It's like, well, why isn't there one there? It's an amazing place to go visit.
Right.
I think the same can be said for the Monterey Peninsula and motorcycles and motor cars.
That makes sense. I mean, like I said, if you've got a racetrack, world-class racetrack in your backyard, you've got world-class roads. I know just from having been on press launches and photo shoots, I've done photo shoots on Carmel Valley Road, up and down Highway 1. A lot of scenic places there out around the peninsula, around Pacific Grove and so forth. So it's a very charming, appealing place visually and in terms of scenic roads. And like I said, you've got year-round riding. I think people that are not from California that come to Monterey in the summer are probably quite surprised at how cold and foggy it can be right out on the coast.
It gets a little nippy around here, but we also now have a world-class motorcycle museum here too, thanks to Rob Talbot and the Moto Talbot Museum.
That's right.
Sleepy little Carmel Valley Village, which is out towards where I live. Rob has got a couple hundred motorcycles in that building now. And there is a great example of a passion collector. It's all passion driven. And, he's no longer in the wine business. He sold the clothing business, the family business. He's all about motorcycles now. And it's a treat to go stop in on that museum.
Yeah, that's right. That Moto Talbot Museum, that's a fantastic collection. So, you've basically got the Quail Gathering coming up this Saturday, and then the Motorsports Gathering, which is focused, as you said, more on cars, will be in August. Is that correct?
Yes, that's in August. And we always, like I said earlier, we always have motorcycles as a part of that show. So we'll have some important motorbikes there as well. Monterey Car Week is another thing. Monterey Car Week gets a little bunchy on the Monterey Peninsula. There's only so many hotel rooms. There's, only so many 2-lane roads. But for people that are into it, it really is an exciting time to come to the Monterey Peninsula. But that's what's fun about doing this standalone show in May.
Right.
May is a really great time to come here. We get good weather. The peninsula isn't packed with people for other reasons, school's not out yet type of thing.
Right.
It's a really, really good time just to come bring the family and have some fun and enjoy some motorcycles.
Well, great. I'm sure that you're chomping at the bit to get this event underway after having it on hold for a couple of years.
We can't wait. There really is. There's as much pent up desire as there is for people coming, and there really is. I mean, we hear it every day. We have the same pent up desire. We cannot wait to welcome people back and enjoy two wheels again. It's time.
That's great. Well, like I said, I'm really sorry to miss the gathering this year.
Yeah, we're going to miss
you. Our former editor-in-chief, Mark Tuttle, will be there, and I think Clem will probably be there. So we'll definitely have a write-up on our website and in the magazine. And like I said, in the show notes, we'll have links for information about tickets. If somebody can't attend this year, I know it's going to be kind of short notice. But yeah, you could plan for next year, especially for something like the Legends Ride, to get involved and come out for that special event.
Well, and for late planners, we make tickets available day of. A lot of folks just like to stick their head out the window and see what the weather's going to look like. And if it looks like it's worth hopping on the bike and heading down to Carmel Valley, we've got tickets. We'll have tickets at the door. So come on by.
That's great.
Yep.
Well, Gordon, I really appreciate your time. Have a successful event.
Likewise, Greg. Thanks for everything you do. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, I'm Greg Drevenstedt. Thanks for listening, and keep the rubber side down. If you've enjoyed listening to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe, leave us a positive rating, and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit ridermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Rider Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.